To the Austin Parks Foundation's Park Summit series. Today, we are so pleased to welcome Zach Baumer, Climate Program Manager with the Office of Sustainability. He'll be talking today about the Climate Equity Plan, which goes to Council next week for adoption, and highlight how natural systems like parks are integral to that plan. Thanks so much for being here today, Zach.
Thanks for having me, Kathleen. I'm excited to talk about this. Climate change, parks, natural systems. It's all the good stuff.
Oh yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So as Kathleen said, my name is Zach Baumer. I'm Climate Program Manager with the City of Austin. I've worked at the city for about 10 years in our Office of Sustainability. And what I focus on day to day is coordinating the city's response to climate change. How do we collectively as a community reduce greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change? And how do we prepare for how the climate will be changing in the coming year? So adaptation and resilience as it relates to climate change. So as Kathleen said, my team and I and hundreds of community members have been working on a new version of our community-focused climate plan. And this was originally directed by City Council going back to 2007. But City Council has set numerous goals and targets and passed resolutions related to climate change over the course of the last 15 years. And this most recent effort is version 2 of this community-focused climate plan and this time it's called the Austin Climate Equity Plan. So presentation today, I'm going to walk through the process to create that plan, what's in the plan, and then kind of specifically highlight a new section of the plan called Natural Systems, which focuses on the natural world around us, trees, agriculture, landscapes, kind of everything that's alive in the world that uses carbon dioxide for food. So I'm going to jump into the presentation and take it away here.
All right, thank you.
Okay, can you see that?
Yep, looks good.
Great. Okay. So this is the cover of the new plan. It's called the Austin Climate Equity Plan. So as we know, climate change has been going on for quite some time now, as humans have been burning fossil fuels and releasing carbon into the atmosphere. We have been warming the atmosphere. The most recent IPCC report that was released, the 6th assessment report, this came out just this summer, paints a dire picture about climate change. Global emissions from burning fossil fuels have not started to come down. The atmosphere has already warmed more than 1 degree centigrade. We are already seeing extreme weather and climate change effects across our world. And if we don't dramatically and drastically reduce those emissions, as well as capture more and more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere into our terrestrial systems, we are headed towards extreme degrees of warming in the atmosphere and potentially catastrophic ecosystem situations that support life on Earth. So this is really important that we all do everything that we can in the next 10, 20, 30 years to bring down levels of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. A theme you're going to hear me talk about a lot in this presentation is the connection to equity and the connection between an environmental focus and sort of a racial equity and social justice focus. One of the initial connections is about how the climate is projected to change. So we know from climate scientists, we've gotten climate data and modeling done for the Austin area. And we know that extreme high temperatures, more drought, increased risk of wildfire, and more intense rain and flooding are how we're going to see the climate change in the Austin area. All of these things affect our natural systems around us, and low-income communities and communities of color are disproportionately affected by these things. They're most likely to be affected by them. It's the hardest for them to bounce back, and they suffer the most long-term impacts from these changes over time. So This is kind of one of the first reasons why it's important to not only just be thinking about the environment, but be thinking about the social impacts of climate change on our community. So what's the timeline and the sort of process that we've been working on? The graphic you see here is the first version of the Austin Community Climate Plan. So back in 2014, our city council adopted the goal of net zero community-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And me and my staff worked with stakeholders in 2014 and 15 to create this initial plan. So we created it in kind of a community collaborative process. City council adopted it in 2015, and we've been working to implement the goals and strategies in that plan over the last 5 years. What was written into that plan and the council resolution that adopted it was that we would fully update this plan every 5 years. So starting in 2019, my office and numerous other departments and community members worked together to fire up a new process to engage with the community, work with the newest and best information and data that we had, and create a new version of this plan. So we started in fall of 2019, all through 2020, through the pandemic. We convened over 150 stakeholders, city and community, to collaborate together to create this new version of the plan. We released a version for public comment in September of 2020. We had numerous levels of revisions. We reported and presented this to like 25 different boards and commissions. Early in 2021, we sort of put the whole process on hold because of the Texas legislative session, and there were numerous anti-climate and anti-environment sort of bills that were up for adoption during the session. So we just put the whole process on hold to make sure that we didn't sort of create any additional political friction. The legislative session ended early this summer, and then we kind of went through the process to finalize the plan and are now bringing the plan to City Council for adoption next week. So to create this whole plan, the final product is like 100 pages long. A lot of work and thought has been put into this. And so this was not just me and even a small group of people that created this. We created a whole sort of network and framework of people participating, a real diverse set of participants from the community. We really tried to strive for a community ownership approach where I was trying to put as much agency and decision-making on the community in terms of what did they want to see in the plan, and focused on upfront equity training in the beginning for all plan participants. So all these boxes on the screen here essentially just communicate that there was a commission called the Joint Sustainability Committee that focuses on the impacts of climate change. They were kind of overseeing the direction of this whole plan. We created a steering committee. It was made up of about 20 community members that were kind of the board of directors for the plan. They kind of directed all the major decisions that went into this process. And then we had these 5 groups at the bottom. So the 5 groups were transportation electrification, transportation land use, sustainable buildings, food and product consumption, and natural systems. And each one of those groups was made up of 5 or 6 community members and like 20 community members. So all of these groups met every other week for about a year. So studying the issue, studying the emission sources, studying what best practices were, what the solutions could be, pulling it all together and actually proposing what is in this final version of this plan going to council. This is just a quick snapshot of organizations that participated and supported the creation of this plan. We had community members from businesses, from nonprofits, universities, other governmental entities. Lots of people donated a lot of time to collaborate together to create this plan. One of the more interesting things that we tried to do in terms of engagement with this sort of plan was get the voices of real Austinites experiencing life on a day-to-day basis that wouldn't necessarily show up at a city council meeting or participate in an advisory group. So we created this community climate ambassador program. All the members on the screen here, except for the young woman in the jean jacket, her name's Celine. Celine worked for me and was sort of the project manager of this program. All these folks on the screen they applied and then were reimbursed for their time to talk to their community about how did climate change affect them, what did they care about in terms of the environment, and report that back to us. So this community voice of these people was directly kind of integrated into the planning process as we went along. As I said in the very beginning, one of the goals that was set from the very beginning in this process was to center how we address climate change with also how we address racial equity and aiming at eliminating disparities that can be predicted by race, connecting those two things and connecting them because the cause of those two things and the cause of exploiting people, exploiting the environment, exploiting animals is sort of ultimately kind of the same issue. And if we're not connecting these two issues, and if we're not trying to be inclusive and proactively address equity in a plan like this that is so far reaching across our community, we're going to miss the mark. So through a lot of discussion, we came up with these values in the center, and the values are kind of what we center the entire planning process upon. Noting that if we're not proactively addressing equity in a city plan like this, we would just be perpetuating injustice in our community, and that's not acceptable. So now to the details of sort of what we did in this plan. Me and my team at the Office of Sustainability, we do what's called the community carbon footprint. So we collect data from lots of different data sources and estimate the total emissions of carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas emissions, from all of the direct sources of using fossil fuels and of greenhouse gases in the community. So we do this every year so we can track a trend over time of what are our total collective community-wide emissions. So total emissions in 2019 were 12.3 million metric tons, and that's for the city of Austin, so about 1 million people. 40% of those emissions come from transportation. That's the largest source of emissions. All the cars, all the trucks, all the gasoline, all the diesel, all that, largest source. Second largest source of emissions is electricity. So that's city of Austin, Austin Energy, power plants that we have. That sector of emissions is shrinking as Austin Energy implements their generation planning, climate plans into the future, and have on the plan to close numerous power plants in the coming years. And then we have a bunch of small sectors of emissions. So natural gas, that's not natural gas for power plants. That's natural gas that we use for heating water, heating air, cooking, all those things. Refrigerants, that's a small sector of emissions, but that's the chemicals that we use to do commercial like refrigeration, freezing, your air conditioner, the chemicals that are in your refrigerator, those chemicals, when they leak to the atmosphere, are greenhouse gas emissions. Industrial emissions, that's a picture right there of a semiconductor wafer. We have semiconductor facilities in Austin, and they emit greenhouse gas emissions to the atmosphere that they use like in their processes to create those things. And then finally, waste. We don't capture here the full life cycle of all the products and recycling and where everything is grown. This is just sort of the direct emissions that occur like at landfills in our community. So those are the general sources of emissions, of how emissions are being generated into the atmosphere. So the graphic here, this is the pie chart, but now in stack bar format. So essentially showing that emissions in our community peaked in about 2011. They've been coming down over time. The emissions that have been coming down the most are energy in buildings, or most prominently electricity, as Austin Energy has been investing in energy efficiency and renewable energy. The carbon footprint of our electricity has been shrinking dramatically and is projected to continue to shrink in the coming years. The big important thing on this slide is that The current council adopted a target is that we try to get to net zero emissions by 2050. And council in the climate emergency resolution that city council passed in 2019, I think, they asked us to re-examine that target and determine if we should have a more aggressive target. So we went through a bunch of process to analyze other cities' targets, analyze what we thought we could do, and we've come up with a new proposed goal. So on September 30th, we're asking City Council to adopt this plan and adopt this new target, which is to try to get to net zero emissions by 2040. So essentially moving the target up by 10 years and making the sort of reduction pathway much steeper, because the scientists tell us and the IPCC tells us that this is what we need to do to try to avoid the worst of climate change happening. Okay. So as I talked about on a couple slides ago, the organization, these are the 5 plan sections that we had advisory groups work on and have created goals and strategies in the new plan. It's important to remember, though, that there's a lot going on in the city of Austin, right? Like there's a zero waste plan, there's a water forward plan, there's Project Connect, there's Imagine Austin, there's Austin Energy's plan, there's transportation, there's a lot of other plans that are already underway and have goals and strategies and directives that address climate change. So when creating a plan like this, we had to sort of be careful not to overstep and like create duplicative or overstepping goals. And so we had to make sure that what we created in the plan here fits within other council adopted goals. So like you don't see a renewable energy section to this plan because we are assuming that Austin Energy's plans to decarbonize the electricity, that's already adopted, that's happening. So this plan is meant to supplement and connect and sort of interconnect the whole picture here. It's important to note that of these 5 sections, 2 of them are really brand new, consumption, and the one that this group is most interested in, natural systems. So these are sort of brand new to this type of plan for us. So overall, what's in this plan? It's 4 cross-cutting strategies, which I'm going to talk about, 17 quantitative targets, which are all oriented around 2030. So what do we get accomplished in the next 10 years? And then 74 strategies, which are focused on 5 years, because we plan to revise this plan again in 5 years. The way you will end up seeing equity throughout this plan is it's baked into all the strategies and the details of really how does the plan get implemented. And do things get prioritized as we go forward? So the 4 cross-cutting strategies in the plan are green jobs and entrepreneurship, prioritizing local community initiatives, regional collaboration, and then local carbon reduction projects, carbon offsets, and carbon dioxide removal. So these 4 things were sort of seen across all areas of the plan, areas that we could make progress and areas that would accentuate and sort of enhance our community's ability to reduce emissions and create additional benefits in the community. Okay, so to the 5 sections. The first 4, I'm just going to kind of breeze over. Let's give you a highlight. Sustainable buildings. There are 4 goals in the sustainable building section. The first goal here is by 2030, achieve net zero carbon for all new buildings, reduce emissions by 20% from existing buildings, while lowering natural gas related emissions by 30% from all buildings. So the key here is try to get fossil fuels out of our buildings. Try to get to buildings that are run on 100% renewable energy. So, our day-to-day lives that we spend most of the time inside buildings isn't just constantly using fossil fuels. Second category, there are 2 categories on transportation. So as we talked about in the beginning, transportation is the largest source of emissions, and over time, it's just going to continue to become a larger and larger portion. So one of the 3 goals here related to transportation and land use is by 2030, 50% of all trips in Austin are on public transit, biking, walking, basically non-single occupancy vehicles. So the best solution with transportation is just to not use any car at all, and be able to get around through other means. Second best solution with transportation is to electrify the transportation. We have so much renewable energy in Texas and with Austin Energy coming online. If you have renewable energy, you can put it into battery electric vehicles. We can dramatically reduce emissions, improve our air quality, it's a major benefit for us. And we realize that it's going to be really challenging to get all the cars off the road, right? Like our city has already been developed in a certain way. The cars aren't disappearing. So the goal here is by 2030 to get 40% of total vehicle miles traveled in the city electrified, and have electric vehicle ownership be diverse culturally, geographically, and economically across the city. Okay, fourth category is food and product consumption. So Austin Resource Recovery really kind of owns the space of zero waste and composting and recycling and end of life. So what we tried to get to with this section was trying to move beyond and think bigger than just end of life. So we were thinking about things like purchasing and life cycle impacts of government purchasing and reuse and circular economy. And one of the major areas of impact is with food. So the food that we eat, most of it comes from other places and has a gigantic carbon footprint. So by 2030, one of the goals here is by 2030, all Austinites can access a food system that's community driven, prioritizes regenerative agriculture, supports dietary and health agency, prefers plant-based foods, and minimizes waste. So this one's really important. And on to the last section. So the last section here is natural systems. So in years past, we hadn't included something like natural systems because it's very hard to measure and know exactly how much carbon dioxide is being pulled into any given tree, or in this picture, that's the Bull Creek Preserve off 360. With a car, you can measure the gallons of fuel. With your house, you can measure the kilowatts of electricity. It's very easy to measure the quantitative amount of fossil fuels that we're emitting, but it's hard to know exactly how much carbon dioxide is being pulled out of the atmosphere and being pulled into our natural systems. Carbon dioxide is invisible. Plants pull that stuff in invisibly. There's no carbon meter on soil. There's no carbon meter on a tree telling you exactly what happened. But we know that healthy soils, healthy agriculture, healthy ecosystems, grasslands, more trees, we know that those things capture additional carbon. And we not only at this point need to reduce our emissions that are going up, but the more carbon that we pull out of the atmosphere, that actually helps us go negative and helps us sort of like offset emissions that are going into the atmosphere. So we created 4 new goals and a bunch of strategies about natural systems. And we actually made an attempt at quantifying what we thought could happen if we implemented all this. So these are the goals that we created around natural systems. To create these, we had staff from the Parks Department, from Watershed, from Austin Water. We had like 20 plus community members that were super knowledgeable and care a lot about all this stuff. And we connected all those dots to create this. So I'm going to just go through all 4 of these. So the first one here is legally protecting an additional 20,000 acres of carbon pools on natural lands and manage all in new and existing natural areas with a focus on resilience. So the idea here is that through the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve and all of the water protection lands that we have, there is a lot of land in our community that's already protected and is already sequestering from the atmosphere. So the more that we can add to those lands and make sure that we are managing those lands in a way that they're resilient and capture carbon from the atmosphere, the more direct carbon that will get pulled down. The second one is related to food and agriculture. So for this one, we're thinking a little bit bigger than just city of Austin. We kind of expanded to like the 5-county area. So protect 500,000 acres of farmland from development in the 5-county region with legal protections and regenerative agriculture programs. So the key thing here is first, protect the farmland, because if you had farmland and then you pave it over with houses, it's no longer operating as agriculture anymore. And then the second thing is regenerative agriculture. Is that in agriculture, as with management of a preserve or a park, you can manage it in a way, and you can do agriculture in a way that actually creates greenhouse gas emissions, or you can follow practices that enhance the soil and enhance compost and do all of the things that are building carbon and nutrients in our soil and storing it there and not releasing it to the atmosphere constantly. Third goal is super important for so many reasons. Achieve at least a 50% citywide tree canopy cover by 2050. Focus on increasing canopy equitably across our city. So more trees in our city not only capture more carbon, they keep our city cool, they make our city beautiful, they create more habitat for animals and ecosystems around us. More trees in our city and community, and especially in areas in the city where we don't have a lot of trees, is super important. And then the final one, include all city-owned lands under a management plan that results in neutral or negative carbon emissions and maximizes community benefits. So the idea here is you have any given park or any given sort of city piece of land. If you're mowing that piece of land constantly with a gas-powered mower, or you're cutting trees down, or there's any number of things in the management of land that will actually increase emissions from land. So essentially, this is parks, watershed, all sort of parts of the city organization, taking a look at how we manage our city lands and prioritizing capturing as much carbon as possible in those city-owned lands, working with the community to be stewards and help us on this, and try to enhance the total amount of carbon that we can remove to the atmosphere and get into all of our city-owned lands across the community, including parks. So if you total that all up, all the things that are in this plan, you can see the 2020, 2019 is where emissions currently are. If we just stopped doing everything, stopped Austin Energy's plans, emissions would just rise into the future. So all the colored bars at the top are sort of all of the major things the city's doing to reduce emissions. And we think in the next 10 years, we can, within like what we know now, we can definitely reduce emissions by 50% if we put the time and energy and effort into achieving everything in this plan. That doesn't quite get us to the goal line for our new 2040 target. But a thing that will help us is the green box here. So we estimated if we achieved all four of those things on that last slide, how much additional carbon would be sequestered into our natural systems. And it's estimated that up to 700,000 tons of additional carbon could be sequestered into our soils and natural systems. So that would sort of contribute to meeting this gap. So it's not the end of the world that we don't exactly line everything up to meet this target. We're going to revise this plan in 5 years. Federal government is working on this. There's all sorts of other things that are in play. So we were trying to, with this plan, be as honest and straightforward, but as aggressive and like realistic as possible in our measurement and in our sort of piecing together the whole picture on this. So the key message here is like we all have things that we can do individually and participate in the citywide plan to reach this target. And natural systems and parks and increasing carbon sequestration in the world around us is a key part of that solution. So thank you very much, Kathleen, for taking the time to record this and sharing this with all of your members and participants. Here's my email address if anybody has any questions. And September 30th on the city council agenda, it's item number 99 is the item to adopt this new plan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zach. This is very informative. And, it's like there's so much about it that's sort of daunting, but at the same time, I'm thinking so much about what we as an organization and other community partners are already doing and how we can, sort of re-engage our constituents toward this goal and kind of like renew our focus and energy around it. So it's really wonderful that the city, that you all have been working on this amazing plan and really addressing the equity issues, and which is something that we're also really committed to. And just it's really something that everyone in the city who's already kind of working in these green spaces in particular can actually like really get behind and work toward this common goal. So it's very exciting. Thanks for providing your contact information. If folks are watching this and want to get in touch with Zach about the climate equity plan, there's his email. You can also get in touch with me, Kathleen at austinparks.org, if you have any questions about what we're doing or what you can do as a community steward to meet these goals. So thanks again, Zach.
Thank you so much.